In the near future, millions of people suddenly vanished from Earth without a trace. The news covered the event extensively. The disappearances happened abruptly, even though there had been many prior warnings. Still, high-ranking political figures categorically denied any kind of supernatural involvement, and no one wanted to remember that ancient texts had already warned about a great departure. Various theories emerged to explain the events, including alien conspiracies and unexplained natural phenomena. At that moment, oligarch Jonathan Stonegold decided to buy the world's largest information network, called Eden, and build a temple for a new global belief system. Despite the rise in crime rates around the world, Rayford Steele, a pilot who lost his family, was one of those directly affected. Alone, he remembered how his wife Irene had tried to guide him toward a higher path and took him to modern spiritual gatherings. But he was never in a hurry to follow the way of faith. Everything changed when, during a flight at 30,000 feet, some passengers vanished from the plane. In that moment, he realized that what Irene had spoken of, a sudden global event, had truly happened. Now, Ray deeply feels the absence of his wife and son and begins to open himself to the idea that the event might have been real. One day, journalist Cameron Buck Williams presents a broadcast dedicated to the disappearances. In recent times, the world has seen a rise in violent crimes, and experts are predicting an even more critical situation ahead. Dr. Kim Cage, Buck's guest, is investigating what she calls a pandemic of darkness and insists that a second wave of disappearances is approaching, something she claims was predicted by a powerful computer system. Just as Buck begins asking more, probing questions about the source of the data, the broadcast is abruptly cut off. At home, Ray meets with his daughter, Chloe, who has decided to return to work. Meanwhile, an upset Buck tries to find out who interrupted the transmission and goes to speak with his boss, Steve Plank. On the way, the cameraman stops him and apologizes, explaining he couldn't go against upper management. Buck reminds Steve that they should not allow people who spread fear without offering transparency. So many have lost their loved ones. What they need is understanding, not more panic. Just then, Steve's secretary announces breaking news. A report that Nicolae Carpathia, a former Romanian ambassador, has just been appointed as the new Secretary General of the United Nations. Steve, however, shows little interest and threatens to cancel Buck's program unless he agrees to follow editorial direction. Outraged, Buck walks away. Meanwhile, Chloe remembers her missing brother and feels guilt. Buck, on the other hand, is watching Nicolae's speech, in which he calls for all world governments to unite into a single global state. After the speech, Buck calls his friend Dirk, who suggests they meet in person at a secluded location to discuss something important. That night, Chloe has a nightmare. She begs to be led into a room where her brother is, but he silently shakes his head. She keeps knocking, but no one opens the door. Her father wakes her and reminds her that everyone is struggling to cope, but Irene had always encouraged them to look toward the future. At that moment, Dirk reveals to Buck that a data analytics firm has been supplying the UN with unverifiable information backed by fabricated research reports. The truth is, no one has solid data on the number or identity of those who vanished. In truth, they are manufacturing the crisis themselves. Dirk reveals a clear scheme showing how several major corporations control the world. 15 TV networks, 120 radio stations, 300 newspapers, and even pharmaceutical companies. Among the names involved is Steve Plank. Although Buck believes the TV studio is run by a well-known business family, Dirk reminds him that no one has ever actually seen them. Stonegal is the true owner behind these companies and has been quietly pushing for a global reset for years. Buck was on a plane during the disappearance event where he met a remarkable young woman. He shows a photo of himself standing next to Chloe. Dirk then leads him to a room where he has prepared a hidden vault. Inside it, he stores an encrypted hard drive that, as a cover, contains a full season of The Simpsons. Later, Chloe meets with Buck, who shares Dirk's discovery and admits he no longer wants to be part of what's happening. He truly believed he was telling people the truth, but now realizes he was being manipulated. At that moment, all devices receive a synchronized alert announcing the beginning of a second wave of disappearances. Buck rushes to the studio, trying once again to find at least one credible witness. The guests reference various sources suggesting the disappearances may have even occurred in prehistoric times. But so far, there is no concrete proof of any specific event. Buck then proposes that advanced technologies might be deceiving millions of people. Soon after, a message arrives announcing the start of a United Nations conference where Stonegal is delivering a speech urging all nations to unite against a new global threat. With the launch of the so-called Great Reset, many countries countries are expected to collapse economically, while others will sink into poverty. In response, the UN approves a unified payment system called Eden, developed by scientist Rosenweig, who provides it free of charge to the new global government. Buck connects live with Stonegal, who admits that the first step toward global unity is to establish peace in the Middle East. Later, Buck points out to Steve that the second wave of vanishings unfolded exactly as predicted by Dr. Kim Cage, who, as it turns out, is working with advocates of a one-world government using fear of global disasters as a strategic tool. Even so, Buck has yet to meet a single person who can confirm firsthand the reality of the second wave. 90% of data came from Stonegal's company. Steve forbids Buck from sharing his discoveries with the public. Meanwhile, Ray checks Irene's phone and finds the Bible app, but strangely, the search function returns no chapters related to the event. The New Hope Church account is locked, and the pastor's number has disappeared from the contacts list. Ray drives to the church building and finds the doors locked and windows broken. Using a golf club, he enters through the back door and finds the pastor inside a wrecked sanctuary. At the same time, Chloe is attacked by a criminal. She manages to keep her bag, but injures her hand during the struggle. While gathering her belongings, she finds a pamphlet from the New Hope Church. Back at the church, Ray is helping the wounded pastor during what appears to be an invasion. The pastor is convinced that the disappearances were indeed what the scriptures described as a great removal, meaning Ray's wife and son are safe. He asks Ray to leave him there so he can finish his duties. Meanwhile, Chloe seeks help from a doctor. She knows who takes her to a clinic to treat her injury. She is then introduced to a terminally ill patient. Ray, on his part, tries to find a scientific explanation for the phenomenon. The pastor corrects him, saying the sacred texts speak of a 7-year period of peace between Israel and its adversaries, and that on that day the name of a deceiver will be revealed, a false savior who will appear to mislead humanity. The pastor admits that he never truly believed in everything he preached, making him, as he puts it, a false teacher, just as the Bible had warned. He gives Ray a video message intended for those who have been left behind. Meanwhile, the doctor and her terminally ill patient try to convince Chloe to believe in the reality of what's happening, just as her mother believed with all her heart. Chloe, however, struggles to understand why there are still believers present if the event really happened. Ray continues listening to a sermon in which the preacher recalls Paul's letter to the Corinthians, urging faith in the Lord during times of great change. The pastor joins Ray, who for the first time begins to pray with genuine conviction. At the same time, Dirk attempts to hack into Eden's main server even without the password. Suddenly, he receives a mysterious message from someone who knows what he's doing and provides the access code. Dirk logs in. An old colleague of Ray's reappears, still interested in pursuing the romance that once began between them. Now working for the UN, she offers to recommend Ray for a position, but he declines. He's certain the global disappearance was real and that he's already placed his faith in Jesus. She leaves, unwilling to hear anything about faith. Dirk informs Buck that Eden contains an enormous amount of data, and it seems someone intends to make that data public. Meanwhile, TV broadcasts Nikolai Carpathia's arrival at the UN, where he's welcomed by a cheering crowd. Buck meets up with Dirk, who reveals that beyond financial tracking, Eden monitors biometric data and social profiles. Whoever controls Eden will effectively control the entire world, even basic necessities, like food purchases. The person who sent the access code is willing to hand over all the data so Buck can expose the truth. Dirk proposes giving the interview himself so that, if he is arrested, Buck can still deliver the message to humanity. Later, the journalist admits to his assistant that he has uncovered a true information bomb, unaware that a colleague nearby is secretly photographing his documents to alert upper management. Meanwhile, Ray tries to convince Chloe to come to church, but she refuses. The terminally ill woman overhears the conversation and insists on being taken to see the pastor. Back at the office, Steve announces that Buck is fired. At the same time, Ray discovers boxes at the church containing pamphlets that explain everything. Just then, a group of women arrive with Chloe, ready to hear what the pastor has to say. Dirk points to a line of code that displays 3 dates: the day of the first vanishing, the beginning of the second wave, and a third date set 3 days later. But the code was written long ago, revealing that Eden's creator had knowledge of these events before they even began. Buck once again tries to find someone who lost loved ones during the second wave. He asks Dirk to search for 3 names in the system, but it turns out those people don't exist. The two head out to meet the person who sent the password. Buck helps the cameraman load equipment equipment while Dirk organizes boxes and suddenly discovers a bomb with a countdown timer inside the control cabin. He manages to alert the others. An explosion follows and Dirk dies in the fire. Meanwhile, the pastor answers Chloe's questions about why some people who didn't believe also disappeared. He explains that the teachings had warned followers of such things. It's necessary to pray for guidance and protection in these times because half of those left behind may not survive. The pastor shows her Bible verses about the ascension, and suddenly Chloe leaves. Elsewhere, Stonegal and Rosenzweig ask for Carpathia's support on their global project, but he confidently replies that everything is working just fine without his direct involvement. At church, the pastor reminds everyone that Judgment Day will come halfway through the 7-year period when the deceiver will proclaim himself as divine and the whole world will believe him. Chloe goes to a cemetery and Buck visits Dirk's secret hideout where he manages to access his laptop. Federal agents show up and begin a pursuit, forcing Buck to hide inside a dumpster. One of the agents, angry for losing him, fires into the dumpster and hits the laptop. Meanwhile, Stonegal reveals to Nikolai that he chose him as his successor. Buck receives a message from the cameraman saying federal agents are destroying the studio and that Buck's assistant apparently drowned in the bathtub. Before ending the call, the operator insists everything happening now was already foretold in the Bible. Elsewhere, the doctor asks Ray some personal questions. She says that her husband and Ray's wife were true believers, and she wants to understand why Ray didn't believe back then. He admits he was just careless and foolish, but now he's finally listening. Having faith means seeking Christ, even with doubts. All that's needed is to open the door to the one who is knocking. Later, Buck finds Chloe beside the grave she dug for her mother. They open the casket and find only a dress, an irrefutable sign of the vanishing and of the reality of the divine. They head to the church where believers are gathering, but Buck still refuses to believe, while Chloe stays beside her father. The journalist contacts Rosenzweig and shares everything he discovered about Stonegal, who used the Eden system for personal gain by installing spyware. The scientist goes to Nikolai, who asks him to bring Buck as well. At this point, Ray shows Buck his findings based on Bible study. Buck mocks the theories, but suddenly notices a phrase that turns out to be the password to Eden. He begins to examine Ray's diagram. It's revealed that to build the Edenic Temple and achieve a peaceful agreement with Israel, something only possible with Stonegal manipulating everything behind the scenes, suggests he might be the deceiver spoken of in prophecy. Buck doesn't believe it. He's already seen what Eden contains, and he understands that whoever controls the system will hold power over the entire world. Buck leaves, taking with him a crucifix Chloe gave him. The next morning, he meets with Rosenzweig, who explains he has long dreamed of building a temple on the Temple Mount, hence his excitement. With Stonegal's proposal, Buck hears about the first 7-year peace agreement and realizes he was wrong. He asks God for forgiveness and guidance to follow the right path. He calls the cameraman and asks for help. Together, they head to the United Nations, where Buck announces that Stonegal doesn't just want to seize the world's wealth. He intends to plunge the planet into a technocratic nightmare. Upon hearing this, Nikolai says he can show what will happen next. A disguised assassin, posing as a security guard, pulls out a weapon and tries to kill everyone. In that moment, Nikolai takes the gun himself and shoots Rosenzweig and Stonegal. Everyone else watches the execution in a strange, calm trance. Nikolai then declares that he must take full control. Only afterward do people seem to regain awareness, insisting that the security guard was the one who fired. The journalist calls his cameraman for help. Already inside a car, the cameraman begins broadcasting the footage that Buck sends from a completely different location. Nikolai starts his press conference, but suddenly the screen changes and Buck presents the real version of events, exposing the lies in the UN Secretary General's official narrative about the mysterious vanishings. Some agents try to track down Buck, but they find only his phone. He has already revealed the truth to the world. Buck escapes and arrives at an airfield where Ray, Chloe, and the pastor are boarding a plane. As they take off, the pastor reflects on the group's growing faith, but reminds them that the second coming is still 7 years away, years that will be the darkest in human history. The plane flies over the city, dropping countless flyers from the New Hope Church, which are quickly picked up by the people below. This was the recap of the 2024 movie Left Behind. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.